You're watching News at Prime. Let's get into another important conversation. African countries like South Africa, Lesotho, Mauritius, Botswana, among others, are bracing for potential impact of the U.S. tariffs, which have been put on hold for 90 days. President Cyril Ramaphosa this week saying the country is looking for alternative markets. Let's discuss now the impact of these tariffs, and we speak to University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies Research Fellow, Dr. Chikodiri Nwangwu. Dr. Nwangwu, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. Just let's start with the general assessment of how you think these tariffs, when they do eventually come into effect, are going to affect the continent of Africa, particularly the southern tip.
Okay. Thank you so very much for having me on your program. Now, what has crystallized as a tariff war within the past few weeks on the global stage can actually be traceable to 2018 during the first term of the United States President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
During his campaign, he made it quite clear that he would impose a number of tariffs on goods coming from certain countries, especially China. And that process started in 2018. And of course, during his during the intermediate period that he was out of power, when President Biden was in charge, similar tariff also prevailed between the government of the United States and the government of China. So when Trump returned to power in 2020, in January 2024, so he also continued in that same direction because he felt that America as a country was being shortchanged given the prevailing trade imbalance. So, but within the past 2 weeks or thereabouts, what the government of the United States under Trump has done is that it has gone beyond China to also extend its tariff regime to several other countries in the world, including African countries. So the point now is that this in itself is seen largely as not being in total conformity with a number of multilateral trade agreements, especially within the umbrella of the WTO, that is the World Trade Organizations. Yeah. And within Africa, especially the sub-Saharan Africa, there is an existing agreement known as AGOA, that is Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which came into effect in 2000 and is meant to end by September 2025. So that deal is essentially designed to ensure a duty-free importation of goods from African countries. But the way Trump has gone within the past few weeks clearly suggests that he is not only undermining the spirit of that agreement, that is AGOA, but it also suggests that he is not going to consider any form of renewal. You know, just like many African countries are already advocating that there should be a renewal of that agreement. So in effect, this is going to affect many African countries. One is because most sub-Saharan African countries has the United States as its largest trade partner. Of course, Africa as a continent has the US as the third largest trading partner. That is after China and the European Union as a community. So America numbers as the third most important trading partner for most African countries. So given this tariff regime, the implication is that there would be a high cost. The cost of goods imported from Africa will be extremely high for an average American to afford. And the implication is that the average American consumers would now resort to alternatives within its domestic environment.
Right.
And that, in effect, would now affect Africa's economy. So there is no doubting the fact that African countries would be affected.
Yeah.
And this is also largely because there is a low level of intra-Africa trade. Because when we come to Africa, in terms of market, Africa has the market.
Well,
a continent that has up to 1.4 billion people cannot be considered as being threatened by market. It has the market going for it.
Yeah.
It also has other things going for it, but there are a number of things that must be done in order to maximize such opportunities.
All right, we'll talk about how it is then that the continent can maximize intra-Africa trade, because that's something that we have heard from African leaders for some time now. Before we get to that, I'd like for us to just focus the attention, if we may, so that viewers have a clear understanding of what these tariffs really are going to start showing when they come into effect. There are suggestions that Lesotho and South Africa will be most affected by these tariffs, while Zimbabwe will likely benefit as a result of its exports, particularly gold. Are you able to explain that to us, why the seesaw kind of approach?
Yeah, the point being made here is that a country like Lesotho, South Africa, I think Madagascar as well, these are countries that largely depend on apparel products, textile products as some of the key products that it exports to the United States. Of course, South Africa, you also mentioned, you also had to enlist automobile products.
Yeah.
So these are some of the things they export to the US. So, and these tariffs obviously would affect them. And that is why countries like Lesotho, South Africa, Madagascar are considered as one of the most endangered in that regard. But for some products, especially minerals, okay, like gold and so on, have been exempted, at least in the interim. Those products have been exempted from such a tariff regime. So even if there would be a long-term effect, but within the interim, within the shortest period, the implication is that there might not be an adverse effect, because the tariff on those products, which in any case are mere raw materials, so they have not been processed, they have not finished goods, they have not been subjected to some kind of a manufacturing processes that would also unleash a number of value chains for the growing population within these countries. So that is why it is presumed that that country like Zimbabwe, which of course also exports basically raw materials to the United States, and several other countries for that matter, that export some critical natural or mineral resources to the US. So there is this assumption that they might not be affected, because the tariff regime is not designed to affect them in the immediate.
Right, and which is why it is spoken about as being sector specific. Let's then deal
That's
with
right.
the final question about intra-Africa trade. Do you think that enough progress has been made to encourage this, or has this become sloganeering? I may be criticized for that.
Yes, it has been more or less an exercise in sloganeering, because the idea of Africa integration is not just a new conceptualization. It dates back to late 1950s and early 60s. At the point of independence of many African countries, the African leaders at the time, like the Ethiopian leader, Mary Selassie, the Ghanaian president Kwame Nkrumah, and the several other African leaders at the time were brainstorming on the nature of African integration, African Union, and African unification that should be experimented with. Some were members of the Casablanca group, some were members of the Monrovia group, and so on and so forth. So they had different ideas of the kind of a unionism, the kind of a unification they wanted for Africa. But the bottom line is that they did emphasize the need for African countries to integrate. So from then on, most African countries started working on regional basis. Within West Africa, we have the ECOWAS. Within Southern Africa region, we have SADC, we have COMESA, we have so many other ones, ECAS in Central Africa, and so on and so forth. These are different regional economic communities designed to promote economic cooperation, regional integration, and so on and so forth. But even within the sub-regional level, most of these entities, most of these regional bodies are still threatened by a number of things, which still make it difficult for them to work together, because most fundamentally, most of the decisions that are reached at regional level are meant to be implemented at national level. So when the national commitment to those conventions and protocols that are agreed upon at regional level, when the commitment is very low, the implication is that they will not enjoy strong implementation at national levels. So within the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which came into effect, I think in 2021,
yes,
between then and now, not much progress has been made. Even though the Africa Free Trade Agreement provides an enormous window of opportunity for African countries to boost intra-Africa trade, to boost their cooperation at economic level, at trade and the commercial levels. But because of a number of hiccups, especially founded within the infrastructure, the enabling infrastructure is still lacking, especially with respect to transport and the logistics infrastructure. It is not there to support this kind of trade that is envisaged. And that's why the moment this tariff regime is pronounced by the United States government, most African countries appears to be threatened. But on a very good day, it would have been an opportunity for African countries to begin to look inward in the direction of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to see how they could leverage the opportunities provided by this agreement in order to promote regional economic cohesion, integration, exchange, and so on.
All right. Dr. Chikodiri Nwangwu, thank you very much for your time. He is a research fellow at the University of Johannesburg's Center for Africa-China Studies. Thanks indeed for your time tonight. All right.